Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food, to disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims? Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace, but ilkes and plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible, holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make, and folks really feel ashamed to express some content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes, it's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason stay strapped with logic and facts. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason.
Hello and welcome to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. I'm Liz Green.
And I'm Rob Penzak.
And today we're going to have a great guest, an ex-Scientologist. So that will be very fun. Chris Shelton is going to be on our show today. But first we're going to talk about some news. This past weekend is the American Humanist Association, and it's the 73rd annual conference that's going on in Philadelphia. Today is the last day, and we wanted to talk about Barney Frank a little bit and how he is going to receive the Humanist of the Year award. He is a former U.S. representative that has been the first member of Congress to voluntarily come out as gay in 1987. And also in 2012, he was the first congressman in the same-sex marriage that's been in office as well.
Right, and I think it's very telling that he felt comfortable 25 years ago to come out as a gay congressman, and that only now, after leaving office, he's finally able to come out of the closet as an atheist. And you know, what does that say about where atheism stands? I mean, it's very good that he came out now, and he's obviously getting this award, but how is it that our society is still so bigoted against atheists that an established congressman couldn't have come out 10 or 15 years ago? Or is he wrong? Could he? Is it safer to come out as atheist now?
You're right. There's such a stigma still about atheism. And we were just talking earlier about what's the difference between non-theist and atheist. And, you know, it just seems like atheist is such a bad word that, you know, people might say, oh, I'm a non-theist, or I'm a secular humanist, like myself. You know, a few years ago I would say, oh, I'm secular instead of atheist, because I didn't want to sound too extreme or too offensive to people.
Right, and I think that has a lot of unfair baggage with it. And I mean, we can see from the state of our nation that when you elect a bunch of people that believe religion is telling them the truth and that God is going to take care of the universe, so global warming isn't real, or all these sort of crazy ideas, the very first person we should want in there is somebody who bases their life on rationality. And I think you're right, that atheist does have this baggage, but it shouldn't. It's really just saying there's not enough evidence for God. It's not talking about anything else.
Right. And so recently, in the past year, he's publicly acknowledged that he is atheist, and you know, he's been a trailblazer. Barney Frank has been a trailblazer for the LGBTQ community, as well as for atheists and other non-theists.
Right.
So.
Right, and atheism is trying to do some of what the gay community has done in getting all of us to come out of the closet. And we've said this before: if all of our professors and all of our leading scientists and all of our engineers and all of our mathematicians, if we suddenly came out en masse, and the public just saw, oh wait, 80% of these people that are running, that have the education in hand, don't believe in God, maybe there's something to it. It's very different than when one individual pokes their head up and the propaganda mill of the religious right goes after them. So it really does help if we can come out,
Absolutely.
together. So another piece of news that I want to get to was we had done a show a couple of months ago, or probably about a month and a half ago, about a gravitational wave discovery that looked like it confirmed inflationary theory and tied in with the Big Bang. There were talk about if Nobel Prizes are going to be awarded for that. And it's a huge deal in the scientific community. There's something posted on the Richard Dawkins site right now talking about Big Bang blunder burst the multiverse bubble. And there's other scientists now saying that there's confounding factors, that it may be there was so much interstellar dust causing some of these patterns that they interpret as gravitational waves, or it could be some of the radiation in our own galaxy. So science may have sort of been jumping ahead in that case, and everybody's all excited and we should have looked more carefully. What I would like to point out, though, is it didn't take a pope of science 2,000 years later to look back and declare from divine knowledge, oh, this is wrong. It was part of the scientific process. As soon as this hit peer review, a lot of these problems, got called out and are going to be investigated. There'll be more experiments to see if it's, where the truth lies. But I can see the religious right eager to call this, see, science doesn't work, it doesn't know stuff. Notice that the scientists will probably say, no, it did work. This is part of the scientific process. Doesn't mean people can't make mistakes, but science has a self-corrective process. So, I'd see this as a victory.
And I think it kind of reminds me of the episode of Big Bang Theory where Sheldon went to Antarctica and they messed up his experiment. And then he sent out this mass email and saying, oh, I'm going to win a Nobel Prize and everything like that. And so it's interesting that now we have shows that we can use as entertainment to kind of reflect what's actually really going on in the real world. And there's a voice on a major network that even though it's fictional, it still is another way to talk about these issues in an entertaining manner.
Right, and reach a different category of people that aren't going to be scanning the Richard Dawkins site and aren't looking at Lawrence Krauss or Origins Project at ASU. All right.
And I also wanted to say that as far as spreading the word of atheism, if you will, just recently on June 3rd, the Secular Student Alliance, which is a national organization with several umbrella organizations on several different campuses across the country, distributed the Young Atheist Survival Guide to 6 high schools in Boone County, Kentucky. And they figured, well, since Bibles are being distributed to these students, why can't we distribute these books? And so I think that's a really good thing, too, that they took the initiative to decide, that just so there's not this double standard, that if you're going to distribute Bibles, we're also going to distribute this information to students. Good summer read, I think, for high school graduates. Yeah,
and it's a very unfair knock against new atheists for being too strident, that religion has been proselytizing since religion started. And so if atheists or secular humanists push back a little and want to get some educational material out there and were vilified for doing it, I think you're right that that's a great idea for them to do it, just because the double standard will be so blatant if religious groups oppose this kind of groups. And we saw in, I think it was North Carolina, where a young high school girl was trying to start a secular group and all of the pushback against her. And it's really disgusting when you see the leaders of the school mobilize against a teenager who wants to be able to be skeptical.
Yeah, I tried to kind of do that in high school too, back in, 2001. And didn't have too many fellow students willing to speak out and kind of come out as atheist at that point. So I'm so glad that there's been so much progress in the last couple decades.
The younger generation, a very large percentage of them are either atheists or really don't want to be affiliated with religion at all. And this is your opportunity, guys. If you come out in bulk, there won't be one lone girl in North Carolina trying to get this great thing done. If there's 40 students that go and petition, we want to start this club, it's a little more difficult for it to get squashed. So again, it's very important that we all come out en masse, and we know young people, can learn those critical thinking skills if we start teaching them.
Right, and if you want more information about the Secular Student Alliance, you can go to secularstudent.org.
Okay, all right, so we're going to wrap things up in just a second and go to a break. We did have a couple of announcements. One of them is that the show is probably going to be taking a hiatus from roughly mid-June until mid-August, just because of everybody's schedules. If you check our Facebook page, we'll post more information about that over the upcoming week. The other thing is, one of the goals of the show from the beginning has been to help atheists and humanists find a voice. And in that vein, I'm going to be starting my own show probably in about 3 months down in Richmond that talks about science and secularism and humanism. And I'll post more stuff about that on this show. And I'll still continue to come here and host Road to Reason. So thank you very much. We're going to go to break, and we'll be back with Chris Shelton.
On Tuesday, May 27th, South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley signed a law designating the Columbian mammoth as the official fossil of the state. The bill came about after a third grader named Olivia McConnell wrote the governor noting that South Carolina was one of only a handful of states without an officially designated fossil. Young Olivia felt that the mammoth was perfect fit because the teeth of the extinct animal were first discovered in South Carolina in 1725 and are generally considered to be the first vertebrate fossil ever discovered. The bill easily passed South Carolina's House and would have easily passed in the state Senate had it not been for one Kevin L. Bryant of South Carolina's 3rd District who wanted an amendment to the bill attached recognizing Genesis 1, 24 and 25, King James Version, as the state's official passage from an ancient historical text. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed and the bill ultimately passed as originally stipulated without any church-state entanglement. 6 young Iranian men and women who were arrested after releasing a video of themselves dancing to the Pharrell Williams hit song Happy have been released after recanting and denouncing the video. Tehran's police chief Hossein Sajadinia ordered the arrest after charging the group with making an obscene video clip that offended the public morals and was released into cyberspace. The video's director was also arrested and as of the writing of this news report has not yet been released. After the participants were arrested, social media immediately took up for them with the hashtag #FreeHappyIranians trending, and both Pharrell Williams and the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani posting tweets in support of the video makers. Iran is officially an Islamic republic and has laws barring dancing in the streets and requiring women to wear head coverings such as the hijab or burqa when outdoors. According to an Associated Press report, members of the Mustang School Board of Canadian County, Oklahoma, may have violated the state sunshine laws when they broke into small groups to meet with Steve Green, the president of the Hobby Lobby arts and crafts store chain, who was promoting a Bible-based curriculum which the school board ultimately chose to adopt. In fact, in an email written by Mustang Superintendent Sean McDaniel, he basically spells out the intended subterfuge stating, "I want to emphasize again, per my conversation with Ashley and the decision to break into 2 groups, that this will not be a public meeting." The Ashley mentioned in the email is an employee of the Saxum Public Relations Company, which represents Hobby Lobby. Intentionally passing actionable information amongst elected officials in small groups designed to avoid a quorum is against the law in Oklahoma, violating the state's Open Meetings Act.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube. And remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
Welcome back to Road to Reason, and we are going to be joined now by Chris Shelton. Chris, can you hear us?
I can.
All right. Liz, you want to start things off?
Yeah, so Chris, welcome to the show. And could you tell us about how you got into Scientology in the first place? Because there's a lot of talk of course, getting out of Scientology. But I am very curious on how you started and a little bit of how you were raised. Were you raised with a different religion?
Well, I actually was raised with Scientology. My parents got involved when I was very young, when I was literally about 2 or 3 years old. And so I was around it all of my life, but I didn't really get involved myself. My parents were actually very cool, and they didn't force it on me. And about 15 years old, when I was about 15 years old, is when my dad suggested that I go down to the local church, which was in Santa Barbara, California at the time, and find out for myself what was it all about. And I went down there and I did their standard introductory line. And I fell for it, and I was an impressionable 15-year-old who wanted to, go out on dates with girls and wanted to, learn how to communicate better so that I could do that, and that's what they promised me, and so I took a communications course and started from there.
I guess one point that I would pick out there that you said is that your parents didn't force it on you, and that's good to that extent that they weren't maybe indoctrinating as much. But there's an interesting tape that I was listening to where it points out there's lots of subtle ways that parents can put pressure on if they want their kid to be a doctor. Every time they talk about, oh, I'm going to, think about doing this in school, if it favors that, the parents and all the friends and all the relatives give reinforcement. And so somebody that's brought up with your family, your parents in Scientology, I would worry that you did get a lot of encouragement, even if subtly, that helped you end up in this path.
For sure. And any time that I brought up anything, sort of, well, it seems kind of strange, or it seems kind of weird, or, well, I don't really know about this, my parents would absolutely, slap me down on it. No question about that. And I was, of course, brought up with the lingo, with the terminology, because one thing that Scientology is definitely famous for is all of its terminology and its lingo, and there's a lot of it. And so you can't help but, pick that up when you're in a household where your parents are Scientologists. So, there was certainly a lot of that going on. In fact, kind of a funny thing on that was I thought the word communicate was a Scientology word until I was about 12 years old, because the only people I ever heard use that word were Scientologists. Just silly stuff like that. But there was lots of Scientology lingo that was definitely being in my vocabulary.
And did you go to a public high school or?
Yes.
Private? Okay. And did
I went to public
friends
school the whole time.
Were any of your friends?
There are private Scientology schools, but we weren't doing that.
Okay. And did you have friends from school that you try to talk about Scientology with, and they didn't understand, or?
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things that turned me off of it, was the reactions that I would get from my friends. I didn't fully understand it. They didn't understand it. They teased me about it. I would go home and and it wasn't something I was really tracking with until I was 15. And then when I started getting involved in it, I tried to talk to my friends about it, and I was still getting, what's that? And that's weird, and L. Ron Hubbard, and this kind of thing. So I just kind of learned to shut the hell up about it, to be honest with you. I didn't talk about it too much in high school.
What do you think was the difference at that point, that at 15, when you're still very subject to peer pressure, you finally decide, okay, I think I am going to try out Scientology? Why didn't you back away from it again?
Well, because my dad suggested that I go find out for myself, and I was somebody who listened to my dad. I respected my dad's opinion, and he wanted me to go look at it, and so I did. And then, well, frankly, as a very impressionable 15-year-old with no critical thinking skills, I go in there and I do one of those personality tests, and I have this beautiful blonde woman sit there and explain to me how, I'm shy and introverted, and wouldn't it be nice to be able to get dates with girls, and wouldn't it be nice to have more friends? Well, what 15-year-old doesn't want that? So they promised me that, if you will do these classes, you'll get that. And to me, at the time, being a nerdy, shy, introverted kind of guy, it was like a godsend. I was like, where do I sign up? And that's how it started.
And we wanted to ask you, too, about what the difference between the religious thinking and critical thinking was, and where you started to learn about critical thinking and skeptical thinking.
Cool. Well, that all came last year after I'd gotten out. In a nutshell, I got out of Scientology after so many years in, because I realized one day that I was in a position where I was having to tell more lies than I was telling truth. And that was sort of the situation that I was in, and I didn't like that situation. I didn't like having to put on this nice PR appearance of how everything was great when in fact it wasn't. And so I didn't want that in my life anymore, and I decided to kind of hit the eject button on it. After I got out last year, when I left the Sea Org initially, I still wanted to do Scientology. I still wanted to be involved in Scientology. And it was only after I got on the internet and I started finding out many more things about it that you're not privy to when you're involved in the organization, is when my eyes started opening up. And I was frankly spinning. My head was like wrapped around the pole. I didn't know up from down, and it was very confusing as to what should I think, or what real, what was, not real. Hubbard said this, and so I bought it. But now I was not buying Hubbard's words, so now how do I decide what's true for me and what's not? And that is actually right when critical thinking appeared in my life. I was on the internet and I just stumbled across James Randi and skeptic.com. And it was a little bit of a very timely godsend for me, because it was exactly what I needed right then and there. I actually Googled, the thing that I actually ran across that got me going on it was the baloney detection kit, right? Or the BS detection kit is how it came up on Google first. And I was fascinated by that. I thought that was one of the smartest articles I've ever read. And it turned out it was from Carl Sagan, and I'd heard of Carl Sagan. I grew up Cosmos, that sort of thing. And I wanted to know more. And that's when I dived into the world of logic and reason and skepticism and critical thinking, and started looking at, what were my real religious beliefs, what were my real life views from my own truth, from my own reality, not what was being force-fed to me by L. Ron Hubbard or by the group.
Yeah, can I interrupt for a second?
It was an eye-opening experience.
You used a term a couple of times now about the truth for me, and that was something I saw in some of the books I was reading about Scientology with L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah.
And he, even in one of the interviews, he almost said something to the effect, if ever there was a person that would be prone to believe what he wants to believe, I'm that person. What does skeptical thinking teach you about, is there a separate truth for you and for each individual person, or is there just reality out there and we need to try to figure out what it is?
Well, I would tend to go with the second thing you just said, right? That there is a reality, and reality is reality. When I talk about things being true for me, I'm talking about subjective things, right? Like, I had to look back at all of the spiritual counseling that I received when I was involved with Scientology. I received a lot of it. What did that really mean? Was I really a spiritual being, or am I just this? That sort of thing. I had to re-examine all of that without the influence of Scientology, and decide for myself, what was I going to believe, or what was I going to accept as true? What was going to be evidence for me? Because I look back with a critical eye on a lot of Hubbard's works, and the pseudoscience just leaps off the page when you're applying critical thinking to it. I didn't used to do that. Now I do, right? So now I have to look and see for myself, what am I going to, believe? What am I going to assert is true? And I look at things with a much more evidentiary viewpoint now.
And so how do you define religion, and do you believe that Scientology is a religion? As much as you might also think it is a scam, do you believe that it is the same type of religion like other American religions, such as the Seventh-day Adventist and Mormons?
I'd have to say that it is, in that it deals with man's spiritual nature and his relationship with God and the universe. That's as good a definition for me as any of religion.
That's a good one.
I'm sorry?
Oh, that's a good definition.
Yeah, I mean that seems pretty much what Scientology is. My contention about Scientology is not its belief system. I actually, I try to practice religion's tolerance. I'm not down on people for their beliefs. It's what they do, and what they do with those beliefs that matters to me. I don't think it's my business to tell somebody what they can or can't believe about themselves or about God. But I do think that it's my business and anybody else's business when those beliefs infringe on my rights or the rights of others to live a happy life, or educate our kids, or have a successful business, or things like that. That's when I start taking exception to certain religious practices. And with Scientology specifically, my big exception is that all they're interested in is people's money. The religious facade is a facade to get people to give them their money.
I'd like to go back to
I don't support that.
To go back to the very beginning, where L. Ron Hubbard started with Dianetics, and then he really lost financial control of that whole thing and was bitter afterward. And so it seemed like Scientology's roots, they really made a conscious decision that the people in Scientology weren't thrilled about it being peddled as a religion, but didn't he see this as a way to get First Amendment protection, and they wouldn't have to do medical training for all the people that were doing these, psychotherapy-like sessions? So it seemed like he made a very calculated decision about why to call it a religion.
I agree. I think that's exactly why he did it. And the church enjoys, I call them a church. I use that term very loosely, mainly because that's what Scientologists use. I'll call it an organization or a cult. But I think that was a very conscious decision because they enjoy a great deal of freedom under the First Amendment that no corporation or other nonprofit, or that's what am I saying, nonprofit, but that other like entities don't get. IBM can't do to their employees what the Church of Scientology does to theirs, because the Church of Scientology is a church, and they've won or beaten human trafficking charges and the minimum wage requirements and the wage and the labor and hours and the child labor and that kind of thing. They get out of a lot of that. They get a pass on all kinds of things because of that First Amendment. But I don't disagree with the First Amendment particularly, but I do disagree with Scientology abusing people under the First Amendment.
But nonprofits still have to follow a certain protocol when it comes to labor. I mean, you can't have a lot of volunteers unless they fit a certain type of protocol, and then you have the college interns are another category of workers, and then you actually have employees that are on the payroll. So how is Scientology still getting away with this?
They've reclassified every employee that they have as a volunteer. And now the PR line or the line, the little contracts that they sign and the agreements that they make are all that this is all volunteerism. And you're not an employee of the Church of Scientology, you're a volunteer. And so anything that we give you is pretty much out of the kindness of our hearts, and you're here because you want to be, and that's the agreement that we've made. And the church's legal documents that people sign, I really wish they would read them a little bit more carefully before they do, because they basically guarantee the church everything and the individual nothing.
Do you think that there's certain individuals that are making money off of it though? Like, I mean, they must be able, it must have some type of income coming in where they're not legally considered volunteers, but they have to sustain themselves somehow. The top leaders, these people, I don't know who they are, but Well,
there's the people who are in the Sea organization, and that's akin to or analogous to a monastic order, where their food and their room and board and various things are provided to them. But that's the Sea organization doesn't really exist legally. It's just sort of this group of people who get this money granted to them by Church of Scientology International, as far as I know.
Right. Do they not exist really as a legal shield? Because they wield an awful lot of power there, don't they?
Yes, they do. And actually, there's a guy, Jeffrey Augustine, who's been doing a tremendous amount of work on this exact subject of getting through the corporate and legal shields that the church has put up. Because I'll tell you, after 30, 40 years of this, the church is a labyrinth of corporate, trying to figure things out with what is the Church of Scientology exactly, and how does the Sea Org and the Church of Religious Technology and all the various entities that make up the thing, how does that all fit? It's a big puzzle. And there's a ScientologyMoneyProject.com, which is breaking all of this down, and that's Jeffrey Augustine's project, and he's doing a fantastic job of explaining how all of that stuff works.
Can you talk about what was maybe the main precipitating factor for you to leave in terms of the ideal orgs and all the multi-million-dollar buildings that they were putting up and what they were using?
Yeah, this strategy, this was a termed a strategy, a way of expanding Scientology. Started in about 2002, 2003 or so is when the first inklings of this started coming out. And I think the term ideal org, ideal organization, first sprouted out in about 2005 or so. And this is David Miscavige's brainchild, and the idea was that it's all based on the premise that if you build it, they will come. You know, from Field of Dreams, right? If you build these great big church buildings, then they'll just fill up with people because in Scientology, in the Scientology world, they believe that the demand for Scientology is really infinite, that everybody really wants it. And everybody's a Scientologist, they just don't know it yet, right? And so if they build these big church buildings, that people will just be drawn to them like, bees to honey, right? And of course that hasn't worked out at all. In fact, just the opposite. These church buildings have gone, what we call them on the blogs is idle morgues rather than ideal orgs, right? Because that's pretty much what they feel like.
Do you think?
They're just these big buildings. But the strategy was, and this was really brilliant. I mean, you really got to hand it to Miscavige on this. Is he worked out a way to explain to Scientologists that the reason that Scientology was not expanding worldwide is because organizations were not doing everything they were supposed to do. And they couldn't do that because they didn't have big enough buildings and they didn't have enough people staffed in them. And of course, all the Scientologists want to see Scientology expanding. And so the bright idea was, let's fundraise and get all the local parishioners in all of the cities where Scientology is to donate money to buy a big building, and then donate more money to renovate that building, and then we'll open it and we'll go recruit a bunch of staff for it, and we'll open it up and the place will just take off. And so they've been collecting millions and millions and millions of dollars worldwide from their parishioners. There's no transparency or accountability on where that money actually goes. They do buy the buildings and they do renovate them, but how much that actually costs, the parishioners aren't told. And then they open them and nothing's changed. They go from a small building, a small place with 10, 20 staff to a big building with 50 or 60 or maybe even 100 staff, and nothing happens. There's no change. The place is still empty.
Can you talk a little bit about the raids in Belgium in 2008 and how Scientology in the U.S. is different than what it was in France and Belgium?
Yeah, in France and Belgium, Scientology is not a religion. I think that's true in most European countries, certainly Germany and the UK as well. They're not recognized as a religion. And mainly that's because they haven't been able to prove that they are of public benefit. They haven't passed public benefit test, and that's an important test. So in France, they were convicted. Actually, the case is over. These guys were convicted of fraud, and I think medical issues because of the purification rundown. There was fraud and medical malpractice, something like that mixed up in there. I'm not familiar with all the specifics of it, but I do know the convictions took place, and similar charges were lodged in Belgium. And this was kind of going on for a long time, and there was question, the Belgium, will we, won't we prosecute, are we going to, are we not going to? And they've decided that they're going to, and they're moving ahead on that. So now there's criminal charges, and that's significant because it's not a civil case, it's a criminal case. And there haven't been lots of criminal cases against Scientology. Most cases have been civil cases. There's a civil case of fraud right now in Florida. There's the harassment charges in Texas that were brought by Monique Rathbun against the church, right? And those are more civil matters, more so than criminal activities.
Hey, can you talk a little more about the last one that you mentioned with Rathbun? Because I understand the husband was like the lieutenant of David Miscavige. So just tell for people that don't know the story.
This is a fascinating story. Marty Rathbun, or Mark Rathbun, was very high up. In fact, literally really was second under David Miscavige. David Miscavige is the current leader of the Church of Scientology, has been since Hubbard died in '86. Marty was his lieutenant, and some have used the term enforcer and this sort of thing, but he was pretty high up, and he was in the Religious Technology Center, which is the senior organization of Scientology. There's a lot of organizations within Scientology, so the Religious Technology Center is the group that holds all the trademarks. So they wield a lot of power. And Rathbun took off. He had enough and was done, and he left. in mid-2000s, and he disappeared. And he was kind of off the radar. Nobody really knew where he'd gone or what had happened. And then he showed up, I think around 2008 or 9, with a blog, and started, called Moving On Up a Little Higher, something like that. And he started blogging and offering Scientology services out of his home as a Scientology counselor. And this just was too much for David Miscavige. David Miscavige decided that this was a personal affront and a personal attack, and he started going after Rathbun. And by going after him, I mean sending, well, in the church it's called fair gaming. Okay, a person is declared fair game for anything, and this is an old Hubbardism where you can literally, you know, they're not under any protection of Scientology, and so anything goes. And so Marty at this point had met with and hooked up with a woman named Monique, and they got married. And so his wife Monique was never a Scientologist, never had anything to do with Scientology, only knew about it because of what Marty had told her. They didn't know each other before that. So what happened was the church sent people down to Texas, where they lived, to harass them. And by that I mean they literally showed up at their house, knocked on their door, had little webcams on their heads, and were filming, you know, knock, 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 and showing up, and hi, Marty, and you can see this on the internet. Just if you Google Squirrel Busters, they had shirts that said Squirrel Busters, and the reason that they had that was because in Scientology, if you practice Scientology unofficially outside of the church, Hubbard calls you a squirrel. That's what he called. That's what he termed it. And they were saying that Marty was a squirrel.
Now, you spent many years in Sea Org yourself, right? Did you ever notice people go missing, like Debbie Cook or Mark Ronder?
Yeah, you'd see people like leave the Sea Org, and you kind of wonder what happened to them. It's all under the rug. It's all kept hush hush. You know, the Sea Org guys, they don't talk about that stuff. They just sort of like pretend it doesn't happen. And sort of that's what I was mentioning earlier when I said I was having to tell more lies than truth. Is I found myself surrounded by that kind of self-deception and organizational deception, where we just, you know, you just weren't talking about things that really should be being talked about, like Marty Rathbun.
Right.
So
can you compare this?
So anyway, yeah.
Can you compare this? You had mentioned either the Amish or Jehovah's Witnesses. Talk about how authoritarian the structure is and how difficult it is to break out of that insular environment.
Well, what happens is there's a practice within Scientology. It's sort of the worst case scenario of the fair gaming, which they call disconnection. And what happens there is if you are if the church perceives you as an enemy for whatever reason, whether you're a Scientologist or not, you could be a news journalist, you could be you know, another competing religion, or you could be more commonly a Scientologist who starts looking at things and going, you know, this doesn't quite really make a lot of sense to me. I don't think I want to be part of this anymore. If you just disappear and you fade away, they don't really have a problem with that. What they're obsessed with is public relations and their public image. So if you go out, like I did, and you start posting on the internet anti-Scientology statements, you become a bad guy. You become a target. And the punishment for that is they will shun you. They will disconnect you. And that means that anybody who's a Scientologist that you know, no matter who it is, family, friends, anyone, business associates, are forced to cut all communication with you. They cannot have any more communication at all. If you're a business partner with a Scientologist and you decide you don't want to be a Scientologist anymore and you want to actually have freedom of speech and speak out against it, that business partner will be pressured to stop being your business partner, even if that destroys the business. If you're a mother and you decide you want to leave the church publicly and you have family who are in the church, daughters, sons, husbands, aunts, uncles, whatever, those relatives will be pressured to cut all ties with you.
Right, we've had Lori Hodgson on the show a couple of times, and she's going through that exact thing. She's trying to rescue her son from Scientology, and it's very difficult, and this really disrupts lives and destroys families.
It totally destroys families, and it wasn't really very apparent to me when I was in the church just how destructive this was, because again, it's sort of, you sort of put the blinders on to the whole thing when you're in, but when you really look at the damage that this causes, it is unbelievable. It is tragic what happens, because families are ripped apart, and it hasn't just happened a couple times. This has happened over and over and over again. There are countless stories on the internet of this, and Lori is a very vocal critic of disconnection, but there are others. I mean, Sarah Goldberg recently down in Florida had to disconnect, her daughter disconnected from her. And, there's countless stories of this.
And so can you talk a little bit about all the celebrity endorsements and also the falling out, like Leah Remini decided that she was a Scientologist and then she's not, and Tom Cruise and things like that? Because I remember when Tom Cruise came out as a Scientologist, and I thought that was very strange, and didn't really know much about it at all until recently. So
yeah, they rely heavily on celebrity endorsements, and this has been a practice that Hubbard had sort of a broad idea to go after, I think, back in the 50s, and he implemented it in the late 60s with the creation of celebrity centers, which were special churches that were to cater just to celebrities. And they set up celebrity centers in Vegas, in Los Angeles, in Paris, New York. They had these celebrity centers. They've since been merged into these ideal orgs, so they're all kind of one and the same now, because the celebrity centers were failing so badly that it wasn't, why keep them as separate organizations. There's still, though, a celebrity center specifically as such in Los Angeles, and they have a whole line where they will find new, they sort of promote to people who come to Hollywood. And, you should come in, and, Tom Cruise and John Travolta and back when Leah was in, Leah Remini and Jenna Elfman and Kirstie Alley and, all these guys, they're Scientologists, and their success is all because of Scientology, right? And you get those endorsements, and I've seen the statistics of it, and it is impressive. Tom Cruise would go onto the Good Morning America show or, Today's Show, and say, hey, you guys should read Fundamentals of Thought, the Hubbard intro book on Scientology. And that morning, there would be 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 hits onto the Bridge Publications website to order a copy of Fundamentals of Thought. I mean, that's impressive for Scientology. They like that. So they would try to use that star power. But of course now, that's totally backfired. I mean, Cruise just went, I don't know what the hell. He just went wacko with the couch jumping and all that. And he decided at some point to just go balls to the wall as a Scientologist and really put it out there. And I think it was a harsh lesson for him that Scientology is not anywhere near as popular as he thinks he can make it. And in fact, it's got the most negative PR value of almost any group I can think of. Politicians can't run away fast enough when you mention the word, and I'm frankly amazed that they get anybody to speak at their ideal org openings, because it's so bad, Yeah.
I want to jump back to something you mentioned earlier. I was reading Inside Scientology by Janet Reitman, and she brought this up also. How does Scientology go about trying to recruit new people? Because it doesn't sound like it's an accident that you had a very pretty girl was part of your initial experience. Sounds like they really get handsome young men, pretty young girls. They bring people, young college-age students in, and then they disappear, and they're suddenly in the middle of a, organizational meeting about Scientology.
Yes, that's absolutely true. The recruiters are always the good-looking people, the front lines people. We used to joke about it, in fact, in the organization as, the beautiful people, right? All the promos, all very slick, and all these, nice-looking people. And we always used to, wow, where do they get these people? Because some of them, of course, are just models. But truly, they do have some good-looking people in the organization, and those are always front lines people. And they use them to, and really any means necessary to get people in. Although, frankly, the last few years, their efforts to actually reach out and get new people in have taken a dive. They really are not making a very considered effort anymore to what they call disseminate, to spread seeds, right? Get people in. They really don't don't really seem to care that much anymore about that. I feel personally that Miscavige has sort of pulled the flippers in and is really just trying to milk as much money out of the existing members as he can before the whole thing implodes. I really believe that that is the case at this point.
And where do you see Scientology being in the next 10 years? Is it going to have a resurgence?
I think within 10 years it's going to be gone. You know, in terms of Miscavige and the international management sort of structure, I don't think it's going to last. However, the thing that makes me hesitate about that, or gives me second thoughts about it, is the unbelievable amount of money that they are sitting on. Because according to the Scientology Money Project and the documents that he's pulled from the tax records, they have billions, not millions, not hundreds of millions. They have billions. And that is a tremendous amount of money, and that gives you a tremendous amount of staying power in this world. So, a little hard to say. Popularity-wise, though, the membership is plummeting. I honestly believe that they are down to 30,000 members, maybe, including all of the staff and Sea Org members worldwide. I think that's a pretty high figure at this point. And so, it's a little bit of a race between a plummeting membership and that money thing, and then the legal pressures that are coming in because the court cases just continue to escalate. They've now gotten a dozen suits just on the Narconon front, which Scientology publicly says is not part of Scientology, but at every single Scientology event, they promote and talk about how they're making Narconon a worldwide drug rehab phenomenon. So I don't know how they can be so two-faced about it,
We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we talk about Operation Freakout in the 70s, right?
Yep.
That happened. And then also the Dianetics and the way that they're basically ripping off basic psychological treatment methods and making it into something that that L. Ron Hubbard put his name on.
Right. Okay, so Operation Freakout was actually one of the earliest exposures of the fair gaming practice of Scientology, and that happened in the 70s against Paulette Cooper. She had written a book called The Scandal of Scientology, which was critical of L. Ron Hubbard and critical of Scientology. And so the part of the organization that handles legal affairs and handles the fair gaming is called at that time was called the Guardian's Office. Now it's called the Office of Special Affairs, which really, if you think about it, the Office of Special Affairs, like what does that even mean? Anyway, they're the guys who do that sort of legal attacks and underhanded attacks, and they went after Paulette Cooper like crazy. And this is in the 70s, before there's any internet or wide media coverage or anything. So they were able to get away with a lot. They apparently even arranged some guy as an operative to pretend to get close to her and be her boyfriend, and tried to get her to, in a mental state where she would commit suicide, and really tried to do exactly what Hubbard says to do in the policies that they operate on. There's written policies that L. Ron Hubbard wrote that specifically state, ruin them utterly. And that was what they were trying to do to Paulette Cooper, was ruin her utterly.
Doesn't sound too much different than other religions, I guess, in a way.
Yeah. Can you also tell us a little bit about Operation Snow White, just so people can get a sense of the paranoia and how infiltrating Scientology can be?
Absolutely. Operation Snow White was the largest infiltration of the United States government that has ever happened. And that was executed by the Church of Scientology. So, kudos on them. They sent, in the end, I think it was 11 people ended up being convicted and going to jail. They all pled guilty. And they were convicted of basically breaking into government facilities, the IRS, the FBI, and stealing documents. They stole a tremendous volume of files and documents, or they were making copies of things and pulling those out of there, because they managed to infiltrate a couple Scientologists into these organizations at pretending to be workers, and then they were pulling information out. And the whole idea with Operation Snow White was to clean Scientology's records, clean the files within these government organizations and plant, favorable documents in, so that Scientology would appear to be all roses, all Snow White to the government. And that was the plan.
And so Dianetics is defined as a theory devised by L. Ron Hubbard to explain the functions of the human mind and the relief of psychosomatic illness based on the concept of an engram. It was published in 1950 and is also called Dianetic therapy.
Yeah, it's basically it's a ripoff it's a simplified form of regression therapy, where you're made to recall, go back to incidents in the past that are supposed to have emotional or physical trauma connected with them, and by reliving these incidents, you are supposed to relieve the emotional trauma. And it has a limited degree of workability. I mean, it does. It's, there's nothing wrong with going back and looking at painful incidents in your past and taking a look at them newly and seeing how those affect you in the present. And I don't say that in any kind of endorsement of Dianetics, because you don't need Dianetics to do this. But I'm just saying that it does have a limited degree of workability. It absolutely, positively will not produce what Hubbard claims it will in Dianetics, which is a state of mental awareness where you have full eidetic recall, you never get sick, your brain operates at 100% capacity. None of those things happen with Dianetics. Not one person who's been run on any amount of Dianetics, no matter how many thousands of hours you do it, ends up with that result.
Right, and one point about that kind of counseling to point out is that now that our brain science has kind of progressed a little bit, we don't think of memory anymore as it's in there, really deep, permanent, and if you can just regress back to it, you'll see the real truth. Now memory is known to be a lot more malleable and flexible. So if you have somebody who hasn't had any medical training that starts asking leading questions about, do you remember when you were in your mother's womb, you were screaming, you were suffocating, you plant that idea, and people will now start to relive that and encode it as a new memory. So there is a lot of harm.
You're making a very good point, actually. And if you go back, you can find transcripts in the Dianetics materials, in the Scientology materials, of Hubbard's own counseling back in the day in 1950, 1951, where he was still doing demonstrations of Dianetics auditing. And what you said is exactly what he was doing. And that was, in fact, one of the things I found disturbing when I was reading some of that material later on in my Sea Org career, and seeing some of how Hubbard was actually asking very leading and very evaluative questions of his patients, and was sort of leading down this path. And I thought, wow, that's not what we're supposed to be doing, and yet that's what he was. So it was really a bit of a contrary thing for me to see that.
Right. And then Jamie DeWolf, who's L. Ron Hubbard's great-great-grandson, is a very outspoken critic of Scientology. He's... Actually, I lost my question there for a second.
Well, I think it's important to realize that, there is a difference between the type of therapy and like psychotherapy that can be helpful, that people even now still deny because, oh, it's too hard, or I don't want to think about bad things and stuff, and what Dianetic theory is saying. Because, there is something based on science, and then there's this, like you said, without training, people are being planted with these ideas about, being before you're born. You're not going to remember anything from that. Before we close, though, we want to ask you, has anyone reached out to you, and how do you recommend people get out if they want to get out? And also, why is it that people are speaking out faster against Scientology as opposed to maybe taking months or years to process information?
Right, okay. Let's see. Well, okay, let me start off with first saying that I think one reason why I have progressed as fast as I have in getting out of the mindset of Scientology is I had a fairly unique history in Scientology, or in the Sea organization, where I was out and about a lot, literally like around the United States, traveling a lot, so I wasn't in the pressure cooker as much as some people are.
Oh, yeah.
There are people who come out of the Sea organization who really exhibit all the signs of PTSD. I mean, it's amazing how damaging it can be in that pressure cooker situation that they put you in. I managed to avoid some of that because I had a fairly unique experience with it, and I was just kind of good at staying away from that kind of thing. So, and then last year, again, I can't speak highly enough of discovering critical thinking skills, and I push that. That's why my blog is called The Minnesota Critical Thinker and not the Minnesota Ex-Scientologist, because I want to talk about and push and support critical thinking, because it's the thing that will prevent people from falling into Scientology and help them get out of it faster than anything else I know. And I don't push that as, you know, some substitute cult. It's thinking. I mean, it's just how you reason, and it's science. And I think these are very positive things. The Cosmos, the show, I mean, I can't recommend that highly enough as an education in critical thinking, you know. So that's what I recommend in terms of anybody who is a Scientologist right now, is just walk away, just get out and avail yourself of real tools to really improve your life, which is critical thinking skills.
The Jamie DeWolf point that I was going to make was that he said that his great-grandfather was very mentally unstable, talked about manic depression, you know, and other books talk about his, you know, paranoid behavior all the time, very delusional, depressed. Were you aware of that as you started Scientology? Did you become aware at any point while you were in Sea Org? Did that just bounce off you?
I was not aware of the degree of Hubbard's personal problems. All of that stuff is kept very hush-hush. He is given nothing but a glowing pass. I mean, he's the genius of all geniuses. He is the most magnificent person who ever lived, and he was just infallible. And that's part of a cult, is, you know, is you have a leader who is just infallible and incapable of making any mistakes. And that's how Hubbard is presented to Scientologists. And that's, you know, they have pictures of him in practically every room in the churches and busts of him, and they have offices for him in every church building. I mean, it's pretty cult-like as far as him being a cult figure. And so you don't talk about the flaws in a cult figure's character when you're in the cult. So it was a big eye-opener for me to come out and see and find out more about him and the lies that he told about his war record and his education and his marriages and his children. Those were all very eye-opening to me when I got out.
Is David Miscavige given the same treatment, or is he recognized as a more fallible human?
No, he is given pretty much at this point the same treatment. He is pretty much slotted in now as Hubbard's replacement, and they and by that I mean he has moved up the you know, in his exalted status, where people now within Scientology believe that Scientology could not live or breathe or be around without David Miscavige.
All right.
You know, yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. Time flew. We will talk to you
that was fast.
Future. All right. And then, guys, remember to check our Facebook page, and we'll give updates about when we're going to have our next show. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.